Hi, everyone. It's Virginia Stanley from HarperCollins, and I'm here with writer Alan Murrin, who is coming to us from Germany. And he is the author of the forthcoming debut novel, The Coast Road, which is a wonderful, wonderful read. And I can't wait to talk to Alan about this book. Hi, Alan. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, great to be speaking with you.
Ah, I'm so happy to have this time to talk to you. Your Alan was on Writers to Watch along with several other writers, but we thought it would be great to just have some one-on-one time with Alan to talk about this book, which is so delicious. It's just a wonderful, kind of hard to believe story set in, not hard to believe story, but I mean, it's sort of unreal that this took place not that long ago. The Coast Road, as I say, is a debut novel. Imagine the captivating essence of Big Little Lies transposed to the backdrop of 1994 Ireland, which was a time when divorce still remained illegal in the nation. So, within the pages of this book, the narrative offers a profound exploration of marriage, the intricate tapestry of female companionship, and the weighty decisions that intertwine with the influence of the Catholic Church. Um, Alan, that's all I'll say right now, but why don't you talk a little bit about the book and tell people what you want them to know about The Coast Road?
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. Let me see. What do I want people to know about the Coast Road? Um, when I set out to write this book, my plan was to write the kind of book that I wanted to read, and that I enjoy reading. I literally I went through almost every book I've ever read and thought about it, and thought about what is the common denominator between these things, and often it's the sweet spot that we think of where you can't stop turning the page, yet there's sort of a lyricism to the writing. There's a beauty to it, and I also noticed that I liked books where there was some kind of element of mystery, where the stakes are high, because there's nothing that annoys me more than a book that has an incredibly kind of het up setup and then nothing happens. That drives me crazy. And I also noticed that I had a thing for strong female characters, and very, very specifically, often um, a female character that is difficult, but that you're rooting for, that you really, really want to see succeed. And so yeah, that was my jumping off point. And in terms of the setting, it's a kind of simulation of where I grew up, and I knew the world inside out. I was interested in exploring that world, and in terms of the time when it is set and the kind of cultural context and that sort of thing. Um, I had been writing some short stories about this world, this kind of geographical location, this community of Ardglass. Actually, I didn't come up with the name of Ardglass until I started to write The Coast Road. I can't remember what the town was called in my short stories. I think actually it was nameless at that at that particular time. And I was kind of like writing a collection of linked short stories. Um, I think maybe the first one started in 1990 and the last one was like 2018. So it was somewhere in the middle ground of that. Actually, the majority of them were set around the mid 90s. However, at the time that I set out to write the Coast Road, and I was trying to decide when to set it, I would say it was half an accident that it got set in 1994. I was, what age was I in 1994? I was 10 years old. So, child coming up to adolescence, and there is something about the world at that time. Everything is new. and I feel like your brain just absorbs it, and uh, it's really like redolent with nostalgia. I think you're just taking in so much of that time. So that time in my life is particularly vivid to me. And then I went, oh, and actually, divorce was still legal then. So I suppose that adds an extra layer of complication to things. It was only over the course of writing the book, selling the book, subsequent edits, that I began to realize how much the framework of divorce was, I'd say, to be 100% honest, a kind of selling point of the book. However, I was very careful at that point not to make it about the divorce referendum. And that's also, I actually don't want readers to think that this is a book about the divorce referendum in Ireland, because that sounds incredibly po-faced, and there's very little mention of it. It's a hook for sure, but if we're to be totally honest about it, I mean, you've read the book, and the divorce referendum was not announced in Ireland while the story is happening. The only people who know that it is a possible thing on the horizon is Izzy and her husband, because James is a politician, and members of the clergy, because of course they have their fingers in every pie. And the referendum didn't happen until after the story ends. And it was only really, as you know, in the final chapters, Izzy is thinking about what she's going to vote in the referendum, and she's really thinking about. I mean, she says some very important things at that point, which is, what difference is this really going to make to my life? And that's the way people feel about a lot of political decisions that are made. We are both governed by them, but we don't live our day-to-day lives thinking about them in any sort of, kind of granular detail. And, there was no one sitting around in Ireland going, oh, there is a divorce referendum on next week. What are you going to vote? There might have been sort of like superficial discussions of the subject um, on a sort of personal level. In particular, because if you were a woman at that time who said, yes, I'm going to vote yes in favor of divorce, that was like saying that your marriage wasn't working, which was shameful. So I think, things would have been pretty circumspect in that regard.
That's a really good point that you bring up. And when I tell people about this book, you're right. I mean, it's so about the characters and these relationships that these women have with their spouses, their families, their friends, um, um, and I and it is almost secondary. It's just sort of shocking. It's like that was going on. It just seems so recent. Although
Yeah,
it's
I know. Yeah.
not that recent. You were 10 then. Um,
Yeah, and
but
but I've heard people refer to it as a historical novel. And I'm like, I guess.
I
What,
guess,
what, that's interesting. How long ago does how old does something have to be vintage?
yeah, that comes up a lot in conversations. Like that's historical. That was like 2 minutes ago in the span of my life.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I can sort of see that. I personally don't see this as that. I see this as a sweeping story with very interesting characters that are drawn out so beautifully in this landscape that is beautiful, and yeah, just the stuff that's going on with all of them and how they all know each other, because it's such a small it's a community where everybody really knows each other.
but they do.
That's
Yeah.
my takeaway. That's how I feel. And yes, this is part of the bigger picture, but when you go into it, it just takes you away. I will say, talking about Izzy, and who is features prominently, she is the prominent character in this book, but there are other women who you have drawn out also as equally authentically, um, and the relationships that they have with each other. There are moments when these two women are just sitting um, um, in a restaurant, and they're navigating their relationship with their conversations, and it's so nuanced in a way, the way they sit down and they look down at their cups of coffee, and the woman who they know is serving them. And I'm telling you, the dialogue is so real. The essence of who they are and how they are with each other is so rings so true. And I just the you just I when I read this, I thought this brings me to Wally Lamb. When Wally Lamb wrote She's Come Undone, which is one of my all-time favorite books. I thought, I didn't admittedly did not know anything about Wally Lamb, and I thought Wally Lamb must be a woman. How does this man write this woman? And I have not felt that way about an author since I read The Coast Road. I thought Alan Murrin is doing exactly what Wally Lamb did, and that, I think, is it's not a gift. It's What is it? It's just it's getting into the, I don't know, into the under the skin, or into the skin, or just paying attention all your life, Alan, because you've really, I'm a woman and I get this, and I applaud you for telling this beautiful story, and also capturing these women and what they're going through in in their hearts and their souls, and you can just feel it. It just comes right off the page.
That's really, really, really very kind of you, and it's what you hope to hear and you hope you achieve when you set out on a mission like this. I mean, I'm going to say this sort of, I feel like I'm going to say this ad nauseum over the course of talking about my book in the next few months, but I really did grow up surrounded by funny, interesting, and intelligent women who knew how to tell a great story, and who probably, like some of the women in this book, didn't get to reach their full potential because of the strictures that were placed on their lives. And I will also say that, and this might make me sound kind of mercenary, because one is always in search of the good story, like the best story that you can possibly tell. And to some degree, whether it's on television, in books, right, limitations create drama, right? The more things you have to work against, the better the story. And women's lives exist with a greater number of limitations. So to me, often those stories are just inherently more interesting. When there's something greater to work against, then it's instantly more, you're interested in, I'm more interested. And don't get me wrong, when I sat down to write this book, I did think to myself, I always knew it was going to be multi-perspective. And so I knew that I was going to be writing from the perspective of men as well. But at the start, Colette and Izzy were the stars of the show. Dolores comes into her own. I didn't know that when I started the book. And I did think to myself, especially because of some of the realities of their lives and some of the very, very real and tragic things to happen, particularly to Colette, I did think, do I have the right to tell this story? And after a while, you realize no one's going to give you permission. So you just have to, I kept thinking to myself, the only thing I can do is treat them with respect and empathy. I mean, I don't want to get into spoilers, but the level of suffering that Colette has endured in her life, I really went back and forth on what I was allowed to do and what I was allowed to say. But I knew that Colette was someone who understood real tragedy. That she knew it deep, that she was someone who had really experienced that. And so I thought, no, this is, I knew that it was a thing that had happened to her in the same way that I knew her name.
Wow.
It's like sometimes when you when you realize something about a character, it's it could never be any other way.
Mm.
Anyway, I mean, it could be, but it certainly just feels like that is who they are.
Wow. That's wow. That's very mm, that's very insightful and very thoughtful. And I I understand what you're saying because she's 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 harboring a lot. She's really got a lot weighing her down, and she's trying to not show it, but you can only do that for so long. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and yeah, I don't want to spoil anything either. That's not my place. And it because there's the joy, and while there are moments of hardship, I say the joy is in the read because it's a beautiful journey. And you do, and I didn't, you get these women so well, but the husbands, the priest,
Mhm.
holy moly. I mean, you just get their voices so well. And of course the setting, which is gorgeous. Um, it's sort
Thank
of
you.
like a strange thing to have this gorgeous, beautiful setting and all of this stuff going on, when you sort of dig down.
Yeah, but it's a very harsh and wild landscape as well. I mean, Donegal is Donegal is exquisitely beautiful. Um, but it rains 300 days of the year, and it is, you get every type of weather in the day. There will be a gale force wind blowing in your face, and then it will snow, and then the sun will come out, and it is rugged and yeah, it's a wild, wild place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and it's nice what you say about the men as well. It's a book where, ironically, the priest is the only nice man. That's
There's
being
so much I want to say, and I don't want to say it because I don't want to ruin anything. But when we stop recording, oh my God.
back to, but just also what you were saying about, writing about a female characters and whether or not you have permission to do certain things. You know, uh, you create characters and you go along there and you just maybe you haven't experienced it, but you have to make it up, right? You have to make it up. You write fiction. You just have to make these things up, and you try to understand. You try to get inside a person's head and write with empathy, etc., etc. But essentially, you have to make it up. And I think when people kind of are objecting to the co-opting of experience, often what they're objecting to is it not being good, right? Like, that the writing is bad. I mean, that's people's primary concern in these
Right.
things. With God, you just hope that you're doing a good job and that you're doing it well. But yeah, I think, yeah,
You
primary
have done it.
often that would, this, you've co-opted this, but you've done a terrible job of it. It's like, anyway.
I have zero issues with your writing. And I thank you for writing their stories. I mean, one scene when Colette is sitting at a bar, and I thought, oh my God, he's got this. It's just, I mean, it's just,
That was the genesis of the book.
really?
Yeah. That was the first. I wrote a short story called What Poets Do. And in that short story, it was a jumping off point for the whole novel. It was about Izzy going for a walk, passing the cottage where Colette has been jettisoned to, and Colette invites her in. At the end of it, Izzy goes home and looks out her window and sees a fire on a horizon, and the story ends there. That's it. But the image that started that short story was the image of Izzy walking into a bar and seeing Colette drunk at the bar. And she goes home and tells James that it's a sin because she is a beautiful, educated woman. And also because she is thinking at that time, if that can happen to a beautiful, educated woman with a rich husband, what will happen to me? And there's also, there's issues of class there as well. Izzy is a sort of, she's not quite as sophisticated and rich as Colette, and she's not as educated as Colette, but they're of a similar ilk.
Yep.
No, they're actually very different women. What I mean to say is in the kind of like, I guess in the class structure of Ireland, they're not that dissimilar from each other. But Izzy's thinking would be that there's a certain kind of woman who's allowed to go in and get drunk at a bar, and it's not Colette Crowley. The world is out of kilter if that is happening. And what she is really objecting to is a woman of the same sort of like class as herself, letting the side down,
Yep. Yep. That's exactly, yep, that's right. Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting, Alan. I didn't know that, but I thought that scene was very telling. There's so many great scenes in this book. The more we talk about it, the more I feel like, well, I know me. I just can't, I just want to talk about this book for forever. There are wonderful quotes in already for your book, which comes out in June. But I wanted to Gillian Anderson and Gabriel Byrne, Louise Kennedy, the author of Trespasses. But I love this quote I love them all. They're wonderful. But this particular quote really stands out for me anyway, by Sarah Winman, the author of Still Life and Tin Man. And she says, Alan Murrin writes with the calm, poetic fluency of the best of Irish writers. The Coast Road is set in Donegal, the year before divorce became legal in Ireland, and the many themes are equally, sadly, as relevant now. Women's autonomy is beautifully scrutinized in a shifting tempo that moves between rage, forgiveness, and hope. It's a stonkingly good novel. Just read it. It's a fabulous quote.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's funny, people said calm fluency, and someone else, I saw a bookseller talking about the book the other day on someone sent me, I'm not on Instagram, someone sent me a link, and she was really saying such nice things about the book, but she goes, there's none of this flowery language, it's all pared back. And it's so weird because I always think of my writing as so over the top and too much. So that gives you maybe an insight into my editing process. I'm literally always like, oh, that's disgusting. That needs to go. So yeah, that it's nice to hear.
Yeah, I think every word is, well, I'm a huge fan of this book. I think every word is used. There's great economy, and there's also there's love and beauty and understanding and empathy, which is you mentioned that word several times now, and I think that's perfect. That's just rings so true, because you do, in addition to getting these women and their relationships and their struggles and their their sadnesses, but also the men and where they're at with everything, and the kids. So there's so much to talk about. This is a great book in general, and a great book for book clubs, because there's really a lot to pull apart and talk about, and why do we feel about this woman the way that we do. And that's really such a wonderful thing that you've done here, to give us these characters and to give us the story. And anybody who has read this book so far, everybody's talking about it, because they don't leave you. So thank you.
I hope they do eventually, haunted.
Get out, Colette. Move it, Izzy.
Yeah.
So I think that we've given folks just enough, I hope, for people to realize this is, what are they talking about? I've got to read this book. And you do, you should. It's a wonderful read. And is there anything, Alan, that we haven't talked about that you want to say before we sort of wrap up?
No, I think we've covered everything, and I just hope people get a bit of entertainment. I hope it distracts them for a weekend. That's it. That's all.
It will distract you. It will make you think, and it will make you feel for these characters that are
Be
just
nice. Yeah.
so wonderful. So the book goes on sale. It's coming from Harper Via, which is part of HarperCollins, and it goes on sale in June. It goes on sale June 4th. If anyone is voting for Library Reads, and I hope you are, votes for this book are due May 1st, because every book nominations are always due the first day of the month prior to on sale. So May 1st is the deadline. You can get this book on NetGalley, Edelweiss, and dive in, and good luck coming out before the end of it.
Thank you so much, Virginia. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for being here and for writing The Coast Road. Bye, everyone.